The Cold War, a half-century of geopolitical tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. The conflict spanned the globe from Europe to Asia, and its effects are still felt today. But how did it all start? And why did it last so long? In just 15 minutes, we'll take you on a whirlwind journey through the history of the Cold War. You'll learn about its origins, major events, and legacy. It's a fascinating story, and we can't wait to share it with you. So, let's get started. Origins and early years. The Cold War began following the surrender of Nazi Germany in May 1945, marking the end of the Second World War. A shaky partnership during the war between the US, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union started to crumble due to differing views on managing post-war Europe, particularly Germany. The US and Britain feared the permanent Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. On the other hand, the Soviets were determined to maintain control of Eastern Europe to prevent future invasions. This divergence in views led to a growing mistrust and suspicion between the two superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. In 1947, US President Harry Truman introduced the containment policy, aimed at preventing the spread of communism. This policy set the tone for US foreign policy for the next 4 decades. This policy marked a significant shift from America's previous isolationist policies, discouraging the US from becoming involved in foreign affairs. The early years of the Cold War were marked by significant events such as the Berlin blockade from 1948 to 1949, the formation of NATO in 1949, and the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, which further deepened the divide between the United States and the Soviet Union. These events and the policy of containment shaped the world's geopolitical landscape for the rest of the 20th century. Key events and figures. During the Cold War, the narrative was formed by several significant personalities. Joseph Stalin, who served as the leader of the Soviet Union from 1924 until he died in 1953, was a pivotal player in the period known as the Cold War. The dictatorial style of government and the harsh persecution of opposition were two defining characteristics of his dominion. On the other hand, Harry S. Truman, who served as the 33rd President of the United States, was an important figure throughout the Cold War. In particular, he is well known for instituting the containment doctrine and boosting the amount of money spent by the United States military. Several significant events marked the Cold War. The Soviet Union attempted to blockade the western-held areas of West Berlin in 1948, but their efforts were unsuccessful. To counteract this, the United States of America and its European allies established the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which served as a unified military command to combat the presence of the Soviet Union in Europe. This was one of the many proxy wars fought during the Cold War, where the superpowers avoided direct military confrontation but supported opposing sides in other countries. The Truman Doctrine and the policy of control. In the years after World War II, George Kennan, a State Department official stationed in Moscow, devised a plan for dealing with the Soviet Union. He laid out what became known as the containment policy in a long telegram to Washington in February 1946. Kennan said that even though the USSR wanted more power worldwide, its leaders were careful and took their time. Kennan thought the Soviet Union would give up if they were met with solid resistance from the US. The strategy was based on the idea that the Soviet Union would grow in the future and agreed with Russian control over Eastern Europe. Greece and Turkey were the first places to try containment. In 1946, Greece had a civil war that pitted communist groups against the government that Britain backed. At the same time, the Soviet Union was putting pressure on Turkey to let it build military bases on Turkey's northwest coast. This would make it easy for the Soviet Black Sea Fleet to get to the Mediterranean. When Great Britain said it had no more money to help the two countries deal with the threats to their freedom, the US stepped in. In March 1947, Truman asked Congress for $400 million in military and economic help for Greece and Turkey. He said that the US had a duty to support free peoples who were fighting against armed minorities or outside pressures. The Communists lost the Greek Civil War in October 1949, and the foreign aid helped the Turkish economy get more muscular. This policy, called the Truman Doctrine, worked. The Marshall Plan and the Berlin Fight. 2 years after the end of World War II, a lot of Europe was still in shambles. Countries were still working hard to rebuild their damaged infrastructures, and people's continued struggles helped the communist parties gain more votes in France and Italy. The US knew that by helping the European countries' economies, it would not only weaken the communists' power, but it would also open up markets for American goods. As a result, in June 1947, Secretary of State George C. Marshall promised Europe a considerable amount of money to help. The Marshall Plan sent over $13 billion to 16 countries between 1948 and 1951. This helped rebuild Western Europe in a big way. Other countries that were willing to help were the USSR and Eastern Europe. However, the USSR flatly refused to join the aid program. Germany was the site of the first open fight between Russia and the West. In 1948, the areas that the United States, France, and Britain occupied became one state. In response, the Soviet Union blocked all travel to Berlin in June 1948. Stalin thought that the blockade would force the Western powers to either give up Berlin to the communists or give up on their plan to unite West Germany. Truman avoided a straight fight with the USSR by ordering a massive airlift of supplies to West Berlin, where 2 million people lived. At Tempelhof Airport, British and American jets brought in food, clothes, and coal 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost a year. As a clear message to the Soviet Union about how far the US was willing to go, the president also sent B-29 bombers to sites in Britain. These were the only planes that could carry atomic bombs. The Russians lifted the ban in May 1949 because they saw that the Berlin airlift could continue forever. The North Atlantic Treaty, signed in April 1949, was another thing that helped end the Berlin crisis. It said that if one country were attacked, it would be seen as an attack on all of them. This included the US, Canada, Great Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Portugal, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. The following year, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed to bring together the armed forces of its European member states. When Greece and Turkey joined NATO in 1952, it became a more prominent organization. When West Germany joined in 1955, the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact to compete with NATO. Asia during the Cold War. China's Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, took power in October 1949. The Communists and the Chinese nationalists had been at odds with each other since the 1920s. The Civil War stopped in 1937 because of the war with Japan, but the fighting between the Communists and the nationalists started again in 1946. Corruption in the government of nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek, also known as Chiang Kai-shek, cost the nationalists a lot of support from the people, and even $2 billion in American help couldn't make it up. Chiang and the nationalists fled to the island of Formosa, now Taiwan, when the nationalist government fell apart in 1949 and the communists took over to form the People's Republic of China. The United States recognized Chiang's party as the honest Chinese government until 1972. Many people have different ideas about who lost China. Still, most historians think that the US couldn't have done much to stop the communists from winning without giving direct military help to the nationalists. The United States did promise to send troops to Asia to fight communism less than a year after the communists took over China. This was when North Korea attacked South Korea. The Korean Peninsula had been ruled by both Russia and the United States since the end of World War II. In 1948, it was divided into two countries, the Republic of Korea, which the United States backed, and the communist-run People's Democratic Republic of Korea, which was located north of the 38th parallel. The Army of North Korea attacked South Korea in June 1950. Truman brought the issue to the attention of the UN Security Council, which asked all its members to do everything they could to help South Korea fight back against the attack. Because the Russian representative wasn't there to use the Soviet Union's veto, the Security Council was able to move. Russia was not attending the council because the UN would not let the People's Republic of China join. Even though 16 countries sent troops, the Korean War was mainly an American effort, with some UN oversight. The Americans led the UN troops, first by General Douglas MacArthur and then by General Matthew Ridgway. About 90% of the men were Americans. There were over 1.5 million American men and women who served in Korea. North Korea did well in the first few months of the war. But in the fall of 1950, MacArthur's troops landed at Incheon, which was behind North Korea's lines. They then took Seoul and moved north of the 38th parallel. As they moved toward the border with China at the Yalu River, Chinese volunteers stepped in, October to November 1950, and made them withdraw to the south. By March 1951, the fighting had stopped, and Truman was ready to discuss a deal to return the line from before the attack. Because MacArthur wanted a complete win, he was against the settlement. He spoke badly about the president and said he would fight China directly, so Truman fired him in April 1951. North and South Korea finally started talking in July, which took 2 years. More than 30,000 Americans had been killed by the time a truce was made in July 1953. The line of truce had been moved slightly north of the 38th parallel. The space race and arms race. The Cold War also invited competition between America and the Soviet Union in space exploration and military power. The Soviet Union launched its first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, marking the beginning of the space race. Simultaneously, an arms race was underway. The US developed the first hydrogen bomb, marking a significant escalation in the Cold War. The Soviets responded with a buildup of both conventional and strategic forces. The Cuban Missile Crisis and détente. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was a significant event in the Cold War. It showed that neither the United States nor the Soviet Union were ready for a nuclear war. The crisis led to the signing of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which said that nuclear weapons tests could not happen above ground. Following the crisis, détente occurred in the 1970s, characterized by eased tensions and improved relations between the US and the USSR. The end of the Cold War. When the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, the Cold War was over. The end of this period marked a significant shift in global politics, with the US emerging as the world's sole superpower. In conclusion, the Cold War was a complex period marked by ideological conflict, political tension, and technological competition. It profoundly shaped the world, influencing international relations, global politics, and national security policies that are still in effect today. Thank you for joining us on these adventures. Kindly like this video and let us know what you think of all this history down in the comment section. And for more breathtaking videos like this, kindly click the subscription button on your right-hand side. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, stay safe.